My mum was, the best way to describe it is hysterical. She just kept crying about the pain that the other person's mum would be feeling. I found that really difficult to even try and think about. I was out with my friends on a night out. It was one of my friend's 18th birthdays. And we were just out all day drinking. Just another weekend out, really. And then as the night wears on and you get a bit more drunk, I got separated from my friends because as the clubs closed on that night, I got some calls from my friends who I got separated with who were in another bar causing trouble, which I didn't know. And they would ring me up and say, "Oh, Jacob, it's kicking off, you need to come and back us up." So me being the, 18, 19-year-old I was back then, I only cared about my friends. And so I went running down to the scene and didn't ask my friend, what's going on? Why are you lot getting into an altercation for? Why are you lot causing drama? Or try and de-escalate the situation and tell them to keep moving on. I sadly took it upon myself to get involved and I threw a punch at the guy that my mate was arguing with, and he fell on the floor.
What were you doing in the days after that?
The days after that, my friends came round the next day, knocked on the door. I answered at the window, and their response was, "Yes, Jacob, your punch man knocked him out one punch," like trying to praise me for what I did. And I guess at the time I felt a little bit of pride getting that acknowledgement from my friends. And then a couple more weeks passed and my mum had saved up some money to actually take us on holiday. And we went to Tenerife, and it was on all these water parks, and it was on these boats, saw some whales and stuff. And it was the first time, because from when I went to secondary school at 13, I'd almost become ashamed of my mum. Now I was a young teenager, trying to impress all my mates. And I reconnected with her because I didn't have that those people ringing me or places to go, stuff to do. And I just remember feeling really guilty for the way that I'd treated her up until that point, because she was the only one I actually believed that I had any ability in terms of intelligence or my capacity to learn or just achieve anything in life. And so I came back from that holiday, I got a new perspective. Then a couple of days later, after we come back from that holiday, the police started raiding me and all my friends' house. And this was a month after that punch. And then that's when it started to become a reality that someone had actually passed away because of my actions a month earlier.
Do you remember when and where did you first hear that James, the guy who you hit, died?
When I handed myself in at the police station, the police had called my mum's landline number, and they said, "Don't worry, nothing to worry about, just following up on an investigation. Can you come and hand yourself in at the police station?" I'd known some of my friends were being arrested at the time, but wasn't 100% sure what for or anything. And so, yeah, when I went and handed myself in at the police station, that's when they first yeah, told me that they were arresting me. At the time, they were arresting me on suspicion of murder.
How did it make you feel?
A mixture of every unpleasant emotion combined. Shock, disbelief, self-pity. And I guess at that time I also felt unfortunate. I felt like I was, why has this happened to me? Out of everybody that goes around throwing punches, why did mine have to have the impact that it did? Yeah, everything just kind of flashed through my eyes really, and I didn't, in the end I just became numb and just blanked it all out. My mum was, the best way to describe it is hysterical. She just kept crying about the pain that the other person's mum would be feeling. And I found that really difficult to even try and think about, because up until then I didn't really know how to talk about emotions. I didn't know how to talk about feelings. I didn't even know how to ask for help. I just always used kind of running away from my problems as the way of resolving them, or pretending that they're not there.
How much did you know about the guy who passed away?
I think I just knew the very basics, that he was 28 and I think he was training to be a paramedic. I think that was all I really knew at that time.
What was the court hearing like?
The court hearing was, it was packed. I didn't know who was in there. There was like random people from off the street who had managed to get in there, who were just being nosy. There was some of my family in there, people who I didn't know, journalists. And then obviously I was told that, you know, the family of the person who passed away was also in the room. So I think what I did is I put my head down, looked at the floor for the entire process, because I pled guilty early, so there was like no trial or anything. I didn't try and, what they would say, bust case, or, you know, try and get away with it. And yeah, so, and then all of a sudden I was looking down at the floor, and the prison guard next to me pulled me down, and I didn't even know how long I got. I didn't even know that it was all over and I was going to prisons.
Were you scared?
Yeah, I was scared, and it just felt awful, to be honest. I was sentenced to, I think it was 13 months in the end, which is 2.5 years. An early guilty plea gets you a third off your sentence. I hadn't had any previous criminal convictions. My probation officer kind of wrote to the judge in the pre-sentence report, just saying that she felt the longer that I was probably in prison, the more unhelpful it may have been.
Did you feel a lot of guilt?
At the time I did feel a lot of guilt, but I didn't know what to do with it. Because how could I ever know what the impact was? And I kind of think I was scared of knowing what the truth was, like how that crime had actually impacted on the people involved.
So what do you think helped you process the guilt?
Because it's a common attitude, I guess, that even from David and Joan, I think, you know, while I was in prison, they were appealing the sentence length to, you know, because they said that, you know, 2.5 years doesn't make up for the loss of a life. But obviously, once they were told that they couldn't keep me in prison for longer, they explored what other options they had, and one of those options was to actually communicate with me and speak to me. Listening to what they were going to tell me was going to be difficult. You know, obviously they weren't going to sugarcoat it. They wanted me to know exactly what the impact was, and to hold me account. And I think that was the start of me being able to process my guilt, which I'm always going to be processing. And that's my, again, some people would say that that's my sentence, really.
Out of the things that James's parents told you, what do you think made the most impact on you?
Well, you know, I was told by the parents that James was the type of person where he'd want me to make something of my life and amount to something positive. That helped me try to believe in myself a little bit more, because I knew I wouldn't be able to achieve anything if I was just stuck in the guilt and shame of what I'd done. And that's when they asked me, you know, what is it that you're going to actually do with your life, Jacob? Because it's okay saying, I didn't even want to say the word sorry. I said, you know, I feel like it would be an insult to say the word sorry. I want to prove to you through my actions that I actually am sorry. And then, you know, that's when I said, okay, well, what are you going to do? And so I said, I'll give GCSEs another shot at 21 years old, and smashed it.
Did his mom ever tell you that she forgives you?
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Very grateful, but I didn't ever want to expect forgiveness. And I understand that forgiveness isn't something that is black and white. Forgiveness means different things to different people.
Do you think if your mom was around, she would have been proud of where you got to?
Yeah, I think she would have been proud. She, it was a shame because she died a week before I got my GCSE results, and I remember getting those A stars and thinking, oh, you know, that was the one person I wanted to show and say, look, Mum, you were right. But yeah, I wish that I was a better son. I wish I helped around the house more with my mum. I wish I'd tried better in school. But I was never going to let that be an excuse to give up.
And what is the future like for you?
Involved in campaigns to raise awareness that a single punch can kill, that us men in particular need to talk more about our problems instead of letting them all get bottled up and end up coming out wrong and causing more harm. I was putting together educational resources, workshops, in schools, in prisons, doing mentoring work, working with prison staff around training as to how they can get the best out of the men in prison that they're working with, men and women. And so I don't want any of, that's probably been one of my, mantras for trying to help as many people as I have and for sharing my stories. And so, yeah, I just didn't ever want to expect forgiveness, and I still don't forget forgiveness. And even if someone said they forgive me today, it's okay if they don't forgive me tomorrow. The biggest thing for me is my own journey of forgiving myself.
A car pulled up next to me, the window wound down. I got chucked a package into my car, which was yay big, and then I got chucked £400 in rolled up notes. To which point I'm sat in a car then thinking, what have I just done?